Hey, greetings, living environment fans. It's Monday, April 22nd, which is a big day around here because, one, it's Earth Day. On this day, 5 billion years ago, the Earth was born. No, that's not really what it is. Earth Day was a holiday created in 1970 to celebrate the Earth and to encourage people to think environmentally. So we do a lot of Earth Day celebrations, which is like Green Up Day and clean up and that kind of stuff, and right, pick up pollution and trash and all that thing in honor of the Earth, our Earth. The only Earth we have is this one. But even more importantly than that, 1 year older than the Earth is me. Today is my 55th birthday. It's only the 54th Earth Day. So today is my 55th birthday. Don't ruin it for me. Let's have a good day. We're going to study natural selection. I'm going to give you some examples of natural selection in action. And we're going to do, if you have lab, we're going to do a lab where we simulate natural selection. Yeah, it should be a good day. All right. Anyway, happy birthday to me. Yeah, me. All right. Hey now. Mr. Kovacs class. It's Mr. Kovacs class. You might learn a ton. It's Mr. Kovacs class.
It's interesting too.
It's Mr. Kovacs class.
And he's super cool.
It's Mr. Kovacs class. Natural selection, right? What we said is, well, Darwin's old survival of the most fit. Really, it's if you think about it, it's who survives to have offspring. Their offspring are to look like them. And most of the time, natural selection is what we call stabilizing. Keeps population looking the same, right? Most of the population is kind of kept the average through natural selection. If you're way below or way above average in a certain characteristic, you get removed from the situation. Okay? And that's pretty interesting. And then, of course, there are examples we're going to study a little bit later, like the English peppered moths, of what's called directional selection, which is where natural selection can actually change the way a species looks and or behaves, do a shift of genes, right? But what's most interesting to me and was most interesting to Darwin was what's called diversifying selection, which is where natural selection can take an existing species and split them into two new species, right? Or split, this is where you get new species. And this was Darwin's great idea, the mystery of mystery, that natural selection is where new species come from. Now, the fossil record supports that new species have arisen and stuff like that over time, but you know how people are, they want to see it in action. So I'm going to give you a few examples of natural selection making a new species in a fairly short period of time that can be, like for example, let's talk about hawthorns. Hawthorn fruits are native to North America, and they bloom early in the spring, and then they fruit up in the early summer, right? So in the early summer, hawthorn maggot flies look for hawthorns, and they lay their eggs in nice ripe hawthorns, right? And their little baby maggots eat the fruit and emerge when the hawthorns fall and hit the ground, usually in the midsummer. Then the Europeans came to North America. They brought with them apples. That's right, most apples are European and are of European descent, are brought here from Europe. And guess what? Some of the hawthorn flies figured out that apples bloom a little bit later, and they ripen up into fruits a little bit later in the season, that if you were born late, you could just mate and lay your eggs in an apple, right? So you wind up with two groups of flies. You've got the early flies, the ones that lay their eggs in hawthorns. You got the late flies, one that lay their eggs in maggots, or lay their eggs in apples, right? These two guys, for a period of a few hundred years, just 400 years, able to split into two species, right? One species which only lays their eggs on apples, and one that only lays their eggs on hawthorns, and never the twain shall meet, because they are separated by time, right? They can't mate with each other because they are only around at different times. Hopefully that makes sense. So that's an example of like 400 years 400 years ago, there were no apple maggot flies, is what I'm getting at. They are derived from hawthorn flies through natural selection. Or how about MRSA? MRSA is maybe even a better example. MRSA is 40 years ago. There was no MRSA on the planet, right? But MRSA is an example of natural selection in action, right? Where people have bacterial infections. You take an antibiotic, an antibiotic kills off 90% of the infections. Well, which one doesn't it kill? It kills ones that were hardest. It doesn't kill the ones that were toughest to kill because they were a little bit genetically different, right? And then guess which ones get to reproduce? That's right, the ones that were hardest to kill. 40 years of antibiotic kind of misuse and overuse led to MRSA. Staphylococcus aureus has evolved, has changed from one type of species to now a second type called MRSA. And that only took 40 years or so, and it was done through natural selection, probably spearheaded by people using antibiotics. And then my favorite example has to do with fruit flies. Fruit flies are the darlings of the genetic and evolutionary world because they reproduce so quickly. But there was an experiment done with fruit flies where you took an original batch of fruit flies, right? And you split them up into two groups. You fed one group starch, one group you fed just the sugar maltose. In both groups, many, many, many flies died, but a few survived, and they had offspring. And then many of those offspring died, but a few survived and they had offspring. And then many of those offspring died. And a few, they did that for like 10 generations. So in fruit flies, that's only about 10 weeks, like 3 months, right? At the end of the 10 generations, they put the two groups of flies together, and guess what? They wouldn't mate with each other. It's like the starch flies would only pick starch flies, and the maltose flies would only pick maltose flies. They had separated into two reproductive groups. They were effectively now two species, the maltose and the starch flies, right? That only took a few weeks. And so, I mean, Darwin thought that evolution to make new species would have to take a long time. We've shown that it doesn't have to take a long time. It can go pretty quickly if conditions are right. Certainly can take a long time, but yeah. Species, natural selection. How is that?